This is The Rise Leader, the podcast dedicated to empowering today's leaders to create lasting impact. Each episode delivers insights, strategies, and inspiration from top professionals and visionary thinkers, designed for those leading teams on the front lines and from the executive suite. Discover actionable tools and inspiring stories to elevate your leadership journey. Step up, make a difference, and join the Rise Leader community.
Welcome to the Rise Leader podcast, where we are committed to sharing actionable leadership insights to empower our community to level up their leadership. Today's episode is sponsored by Learning Edge, your go-to source for energy-efficient building education. Today's episode is Leadership in Building Science and Energy Efficiency. My guest is Daran Wastchak, the president of Learning Edge LLC. I've known Daran locally in the industry for at least a couple of decades, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Daran, welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. We should have a fun conversation today.
Why don't you tell the community a little bit about your career path? You've lasted through the downturns, grown in the industry, and then grown broadly nationally. Tell the community a little bit about your backstory.
So thank you for that. I started in the construction industry at Arizona State University in the Del Webb School of Construction and went out into the industry. I was working in commercial construction and got a call from a professor at ASU. He said, I got this grant from the Environmental Protection Agency for this program called Energy Star for Homes. He said, I would love it if you could come back and work with me at the university. I was working on a master's degree at the time and wanted to get out of the construction industry, which of course I've never left. And I went back to the university and I started working on this grant to jumpstart the Energy Star program. We were at the university working with several large production builders for about 3.5 years. And when the grant money ran out, I moved everything over to the private sector and I started my own company, Daran Wastchak LLC. And with Daran Wastchak, I worked with many builders, most of the largest production builders in the Phoenix market. Did work with your former company, Mary Kay, then Tri-Point Homes, along with all the other major builders in the Phoenix area. Just before the Great Recession, we were certifying a little over 10,000 homes a year in just my company in the Phoenix metro area, working with all the production builders. Then the recession happened, and as the builders go, my business went, but I survived that. In fact, it's one of my real points of pride is that I survived it. We had 27 employees at the height of the market, went down to 5 during the Great Recession. And then I built it back up to about 15 employees. And then in 2015, I decided I wanted to try and sell the company. I was burnt out, wanted to move on to something else. Tried really hard to talk to half a dozen companies. And at the end of the day, none of them were going to offer me the right amount of money under the right terms. So I went all back in on my company. That is something I talk about in my business coaching side of things. I don't do that as much anymore. I talk about all the systems that I put in place, all of the things that I did by creating a leadership team. That was my small cadre of leaders within my organization. We built it up to about 15 employees. I said to my leadership team, look, I really want to exit, but I really want you guys to buy me out. After getting them to a place where they were running the company significantly for me, I'd be gone for 3 weeks. I did a couple of trips that were 3 weeks away, never even thought about the company, and it ran just fine by itself. One day they came to me in 2017 at the end of the year and said, you keep talking about buying you out. We want to do that. And so let's make that happen. March 31st of 2018, they bought me out and we closed the deal. I moved into Learning Edge, which I had created Learning Edge to do training in 2010. So 8 years before I sold the company, Learning Edge was started. After I sold the company, I did some work in business coaching. I then said, I'm going to work with the utilities on training. The Arizona local utilities, APS, SRP, and Tucson Electric Power now sponsor all of my classes in building science, energy efficiency, water efficiency, and all the topics that I teach that you and I have partnered on, Jeff, in a couple of ways. So that brings you up to speed of where I am today and in the training that I do. Most of it's webinar based. I have on-demand content as well that I make available for people. And we continue to add new classes as we go forward. I love creating new classes. It's always very exciting for me.
And that's why I love our overlapping missions, is what I would call it.
Mhm.
So before we get into specifically the energy efficiency and building science part, which are the actionable parts of what I want to talk about, there's a couple of questions that I usually ask my guests at the beginning. And the very first one, how has that career path shaped your leadership style?
One of the things that I did when I revamped the company in 2015, going into 2016, there was a lot of things that I had learned as a leader, as a business owner, to run my business better. And a lot of those things just didn't get implemented. Some did, but many didn't get implemented. When I said I'm all in, I took everything off the shelf that I had been thinking about and I went all in on it. The leadership team was huge. I've always been pretty good at delegating and getting things off of my plate so I could focus on the things that are my unique ability, what I do best. One of the biggest things that I learned was empowering the people that work for me so they understood this is their company as much as it is mine. They are part of and bought into what we do because we create it together. So the rebuild was not just my vision.
Right.
It was the vision we were crafting together, which made it ideal for them to take over. All they did, Jeff, was continue what we had built together in the rebuild of my company. And we did things better. We did them smarter, more profitably, more intentionally. And how we met on a weekly basis, what we did on a quarterly basis, how we measured our performance through KPIs, our goal setting strategies, all of that together, I feel was the maturity that hit in 2016 for me to launch everything forward. And within a few short years, get to that place where the key employees felt like they were leading the company and were more than fine with me not being around anymore.
I love that empowerment style. That's what I took away. And one thing that I wanted to follow up and ask about is the delegation piece. So you said you'd always been very good at delegation. The question will really be, where did you pick up on that delegation piece? When I'm doing my training with frontline and mid-level leaders, delegation is really outside of your own time management and organization, which for me is life effectiveness, not just business effectiveness. But when I'm talking to these leaders, delegation is the one thing that I've identified through my career that if a leader or manager can effectively delegate, it not only makes their world better, it makes the company better. So the real question back to you is, where did you see that delegation modeled, or what made you an effective delegator?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure that I could put my finger right on that one point, Jeff, of where that came from. I've participated in some coaching programs, one in particular, Strategic Coach with Dan Sullivan. And they talk about the unique ability and the idea of what is it that you do best, what is your strengths, and identifying what you're really good at, but it doesn't light your fire. You're not passionate about it. And so those would be excellent things, not unique ability things.
Gotcha.
And so I think that opened my eyes to making sure that, first of all, you identify those things that you should be doing that are best for you to do. You do it better than anybody else. That's why you're an entrepreneur. It's why you're your business owner. And anything else, while you could do it, you could keep the books for your company. You could do the marketing for your company, other elements of it, but it's not you at your finest. As soon as I got comfortable with my unique ability, I was able to say, hey, everything else I need other people to do. You said rightly that it's good for you as the individual leader and good for the organization. I want to add to that by saying when it's good for the organization, it's that organizations are made of individual people, of course. And so what you do by empowering the individual, you're going to get more out of that person. They're going to take pride in ownership because it's another concept I learned called ownership thinking. If you can get all of the people in the organization acting and understanding what it's like to act like an owner, part of that equation is sharing some of the fruits of the labor. It's a
Sure.
profit sharing type
Sure.
of a circumstance. That's what technically ownership thinking is about. So that the effort that's put into classic example of you see something that's a waste and you're like, that's not my problem.
Right.
That's Jeff's problem. He's
Right.
the owner.
Right.
Instead, you're like, if I can save some time, energy, and money, that's going to drop to the bottom line. We're going to be more profitable. And Jeff's already identified that there's profit sharing. That means more for me. I found it incredibly valuable in getting my leadership team to a place where they knew they didn't need me because they were doing so much by themselves. I was guiding, doing my unique thing,
Right.
but I was not the one that had to be in things every minute on every activity.
I appreciate you sharing Dan Sullivan. I'm a big Dan Sullivan fan. The 10X, everything he's done. He's a high level thinker and a really great coach. So thanks for sharing those insights on delegation. So let's move to Daran specifically on the energy efficiency and building science. And then we'll finish with leadership again. As you alluded to before, Rise Leadership partnered with Learning Edge, and we are specifically using your Become a Building Science Expert for our Construction 101 cohort. I took the course myself just before we started introducing it to the team. And even though I've been in the industry here for going on 35 years, I would say that I probably knew, I'm going to give myself a little credit and say I knew 65 or 70% of what you had in there, but it was refreshing for me to go through as a long time industry guy. The feedback that we got from our first cohort that took it was also really validating. Could you unpack for the community what's in the Becoming a Building Science Expert course that you have?
So that's my foundational class. In that class, I lay out terminology that we focus on when it comes to energy efficiency, like heat flow, understanding that's really what's going on with buildings. Heat's moving in from outside in the summer and from inside to outside in the wintertime. We spend some time laying that foundation and then talk about how we build a building to maximize its energy efficiency by reducing heat flow. We want to make sure that, and the most obvious example, insulation is there and installed correctly. That's the missing piece. Just because insulation is installed doesn't mean it actually does anything for you.
Right.
It has to be installed correctly. And so we spend a fair amount of time on that. We also talk about other concepts of how you would insulate in order to maximize energy efficiency. For example, putting ducts into conditioned space. How do you do that? We touch on that briefly. I have a follow-on class that's all about getting ducts in conditioned space. It's one of my most popular classes because it's such an incredibly good way to build an energy efficient building. Then we talk about things like room pressures. When a door slams in your house, when the air conditioning turns on, most people are like, that's an annoying thing, but it's a telltale sign of a much bigger problem going on in your house. When that air conditioner turns on and a door slams shut that's an inch away from the frame, your house has got some not so great things going on. And we sort that out. We help you to understand the importance of those things. We talk about the importance of building a very tight building. But if you build tight, you got to make sure that you're providing some ventilation, because you can only breathe the air in and out so many times and you're going to need fresh air. That's the concept of build tight, ventilate right that we talk about.
Yep.
And we also talk about at the very end of the class, how do you make sure that all the things we talk about in building science, maximize comfort, durability, energy efficiency, we talk about how do you make that happen? One of my favorite things to talk about is using checklists. What's the basis of that? Why is that so important? So I talk through the idea of the importance of a checklist and how that's been a part of my success as a business when I was doing inspections, that also was ultimately adopted by energy programs like Energy Star. The codes have, it's a kind of a checklist in the building codes. And everything I talk about points to success with the business, the building codes, and the energy efficiency building codes in particular. So it's a foundational class. That class sets the stage for everything and all of the classes that follow on to that.
Gotcha. So my follow-up question is about diagnostic testing and really how that's, at least from my own opinion, what I've seen over the years is, and this is probably a close second to just the inspections themselves, like you alluded to before with insulation, for example. just insulating the home isn't good enough if it's not installed correctly. So a close second behind inspections in general for me has been diagnostic testing. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution that you've seen? In some cases, I feel like you've maybe even pioneered some of the diagnostic testing that we use today. Maybe you didn't pioneer the science, but the effective use of it in home building, at least from my perspective, is what I've seen. I'd love to have you unpack some of the specific diagnostic testing that has evolved over the years and how you've seen that play out.
So in the building science class, one of the first things we talk about is diagnostic testing. What are the typical things that we do to verify that a building is energy efficient? The testing that's been around for a long time, and I should say back to the early 1980s, was a blower door test or the envelope leakage test. And while the measurement instruments have become more technical, the theory and how it's done has been pretty stable over time. We have the envelope leakage testing because I said, as in my description of the building science class, you want to build as tight as you possibly can build a house, and then you add ventilation in. And the only way to confirm that it's tight is to test the tightness with a blower door. So that technology's stayed fairly stable since the 80s. I believe it was the late 80s and 90s we started doing duct testing. And for duct testing, it's the same exact principle. We're measuring the leakage in the duct system itself. And we can then, and by the way, the code and the energy programs, they set limits on how leaky a envelope or a building can be. Speaking of residential more specifically. And then the duct leakage is also established as a maximum allowable. So there'll be a little bit of leakage allowed, but that's capped. We need to test to make sure we're no leakier in the ducts and in the envelope. So those are standard code required tests that every new home is going to need to get. Then we also had training on airflow testing out of air conditioning systems.
Right.
A room like the one we're sitting in now needs a certain amount of air at a certain temperature, warm or cool, in order for it to be comfortable. You have to measure airflow and temperature, and that's testing that we've done. I mentioned the door slamming shut for room pressures.
Right.
It's a very simple test to see how much pressure you get in a bedroom when the door's closed. And so it's a fairly simple, straightforward test that can be done. If you can only have a room with so much pressure in it, then it's a problem for air to be delivered to that room and it to work. And probably the biggest evolution in technology has been infrared evaluation. So when I bought my infrared camera back in 2002, maybe or so, it was $18,000. It was the size of the big video cameras that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
And again, $18,000, and that was the compact model. Okay. And it was pretty limited in what it did, but it did what I needed it to do. And let's just say that today you can buy an infrared attachment for your smartphone for about $300. Now, is it as accurate? It's probably as accurate as my $18,000 camera was so many years ago. If you're spending a couple $1,000, basically a tenth of the cost, you're going to be getting a camera that's way better than what I bought, very reasonably priced. And that's why actually home inspectors that go and do that inspection before you buy a home, the
Right.
home inspector industry, they jumped onto infrared as soon as they could. But I feel like many of them didn't necessarily have training. I do a class just for home inspectors. I love home inspectors.
Yep.
And making sure they understand the building science. Just because you're pointing a camera and seeing images doesn't mean you know what you're looking at. I found that to be the case all too often. People love infrared because you can have the homeowner walking around behind you, looking at the pictures, going, wow, ooh, ah. And it's a great visual effect.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I'll just tell you, I stopped using my infrared camera because the stuff that I could see that was a problem was in the attic, and I would go and do that. The stuff behind the walls, you weren't going to fix it. No one was going to go tear drywall off to fix it. For standard construction stuff, the technology has been where there's been significant increases, but everything else has been around for a while. It's pretty standard. It does the job we need to, gathers the data that we are most interested in collecting about a home to confirm that it's comfortable and energy efficient.
All of those diagnostic tests that you mentioned, I have seen, they've helped me evolve as a leader at a home building company. I would have to say that one of the most powerful ones, though, was the infrared stuff, seeing
Yep.
those hot spots in homes, and then having you, and this goes all the way back to, it seems to me that you have been an educator your entire career. Part of that was coming into home builders like me and educating me and my team on the realities of our building practices. The infrared, for example, was one of the most powerful tools, where you would pull up these images and talk about the pictures of the home, how it was constructed, and deconstruct the reason why it was that way. And that was super powerful.
And that's
for me.
and that, Jeff, as you recall, is in the building science class. So in the building science class, I use a ton of infrared to show a before and an after. This may not look like a problem until you look at it with infrared, and then it makes it clear that what you thought was working is not working.
Right.
I've looked at walls that I knew were perfectly insulated. Infrared made it look wrong, made it look like it was bad. And so it can trick you. You could start tearing drywall off and see, no, this is actually working just fine. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, but I appreciate what you said about the power of being able to visualize.
So where I want to go next is to talk about some of the common issues that you see in the industry today. I've seen a lot of builders, or most builders, again, maybe following the codes specifically, but then there's some industry leaders continuing to push the envelope. But what are the most common things? So our community is mostly frontline leaders in home building companies and contracting companies at the senior level executives. But what are some of the most common things that you still see in the industry today that are very actionable, that it's either the human equation or it could be something with the building practice?
Yeah. You just actually teed that up very well for me, because you talked about the human factor. So I would tell you that anything that you can do that's going to eliminate the impact of human nature, or the fact that a person is doing something, anything you can reduce the impact of the person, you need to take advantage of. Let me give you some examples on that, the actionable examples, Jeff,
Sure.
to your point. Insulation that is a loose fill insulation, like a loose fill fiberglass or cellulose or rock wool or spray foam. Those materials will fill the spaces that need to be filled. Okay. And they are in direct contrast to historically what we've had for a long time, which is, for example, fiberglass bats. You can get fiberglass bats to be installed correctly. In my class, I show pictures of really well installed, what we call grade 1 insulation. It's working, everything works. The challenge I always talk about is, are you going to get that level of quality day in and day out? Because if somebody has a bad day, your house might suffer. I wouldn't want my house to be insulated at 10 o'clock in the morning or noon on a Friday afternoon in the middle of the summer, because that person's probably doesn't have their head in the game 100% every Friday in the afternoon. They're going to have an off day. And so the challenge is to get that day in and day out. If we eliminate or reduce the human factor, we use a blown-in product, okay? Another issue is duct leakage and getting ducts and air conditioning systems correct. By and large, certainly in the southern part of the country, the Southwest, we put air conditioning systems in the attic.
Right.
When that air conditioning system is in the attic and it's really hot during the summertime, that system is going to be taking a real beating with the heat up there.
Right.
I do a synopsis of this in my building science class. I spend much more time in my cathedralized unvented attic class.
Okay.
And maximizing performance with unvented attics. And I will tell you that getting ducts in conditioned space is huge for performance, for comfort, for ease of construction. And a story to go along with that was a local builder that jumped on the bandwagon of putting ducts in conditioned space fairly early on in the industry. They converted over. It was gospel to them. That's the way they were building. They were bought out by another national builder. They were able to keep doing their ducts in conditioned space. Then they got bought out again by another national builder. And that national builder did not want to invest the money in doing ducts in conditioned space or a cathedralized unvented attic. And so I'll tell you, that construction team that had been building for 5 years with ducts in conditioned space, cathedralized unvented attics, when they had to switch back to doing all the extra things you've got to do in order for that hot attic to stay segregated from the rest of the house, they struggled. Every single one of those superintendents wished they were building ducts and conditioned space unvented attics again. They wished, because they were like, God, it was so much easier. And our performance was better. Our quality of our product was better. So that's one I would strongly recommend you find a way to get there, but don't use fiberglass bats at the roof deck,
Right.
because they will not continue to perform at what you think they should do. So if you're going to put insulation with bats at your roof deck to cathedralize, just go back to a vented attic and do it right with the loose fill product, cellulose, fiberglass, whatever you want to use. And I go into that in my unvented attics class, which product is best for this. Those are two things that if you did that, you would take your house to a whole nother level of performance. Loose fill insulation in your walls, cathedralize your insulation with anything but fiberglass bats, and you'll get better performance without really trying harder.
I can attest to everything that you just said. Love that. Okay. You alluded to checklists before. I just want to go back to this because the real question I had for you was, how have checklists improved both the human and the building system? Because I'm a big checklist manifesto guy. How have you seen checklist evolve, or how have you used checklist either within your business or ultimately with the industry? I'd love to have you tell the community, because I'm such a big fan of checklists myself.
And so you just cited the book that I almost cited before, that Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. That book was very informative. I use that to illustrate the importance of checklists at the end of the building science class. I started using a checklist way before they were required by anything. So I was doing Energy Star before Energy Star had any checklists, before codes had any checklists. For the Energy Star program, we had about 35 things that we needed to verify were correct in a house. I was sending my guys out there expecting them to get it right. And then it just dawned on me, I need to make sure these guys know what to use and that they use that checklist every time when they're in the house. And so I created a checklist. These are the things we need to inspect. These are the things we need to verify. And you better check off every box. And if you check a box incorrect and give it to the builder, they know exactly what to correct. So you're going to leave a copy of that for them. And we created 3-part forms. We would leave the pink one with you, keep the original, and then update it when we came back out again. Eventually, Jeff, we turned that into electronic checklists, going right into a database so that we were tracking that, which is really the use of technology to advance that. Very often when we would have a problem from a builder and the builder would say, hey, something's not working, I went out there to check that house, and then I checked, did we inspect it? We did. And I look at the checklist, and it was something that I would realize that they didn't use.
The human error part.
Almost every time we found a problem with a house, it's because we didn't do our job of using the checklist and following along on it. Extremely powerful in confirming that you get things right. Surgeons use them in emergency rooms, which is the example I give out of the Checklist Manifesto book. Pilots use it to make sure that the plane takes off and lands properly.
Right.
So these little things are critically important to success in not just life safety issues, but getting the job done right.
And I think those are wonderful examples of where, when the level of risk goes up on something like surgery or getting into a tube and going up to 27,000 feet, you would want the person who is at the helm to be using something other than just your own cognitive abilities to try and
recall. We're humans. And so we will forget things. We will let things go by, but that checklist will make sure that we never forget.
Right.
As long as we never forget to use the checklist.
And so again, we think about these things that are like surgery or flying in a plane, and the level of risk goes way up. But you can apply the same thing, obviously, at lower risk.
100%.
I built homes in the field for 10 years, and I could pretty much walk into a home and see the things that were wrong just by observation, because I was going to be out there walking homes myself at 2 p.m. on a Friday when the sun was in my eyes or the heat was up around my neck. I wanted to know that when I walked out of there, I had checked everything. And that's how powerful checklist had become for me.
And if I could add one thing, you have to look at it as passing along knowledge and wisdom because that checklist is your knowledge and wisdom, either as an individual or as a company. Oh, we need to add that to the checklist. Somebody said at some point,
Right.
that means you captured that thing you needed to make sure you didn't forget. For some specific reason, that checklist embodies wisdom and experience. And by putting that in the hands of somebody new and a novice, you've taken their game up to a whole nother level just because they have that one tool. And so I think that goes to the power of a checklist beyond, let's make sure we don't forget something,
Right.
but let's make sure that we do it at a very high level.
I love that. And it actually goes right back to that other topic we were speaking about, which is delegation, right? So you just talked about now using checklist as, let's call it a training tool.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use it as a delegation piece, because I would do the exact same thing, which is I was a superintendent. I would have assistants working with me. Hey, here's the checklist. Go check this house for final inspection. And then you'd find out pretty quickly if they even knew what the stuff on the checklist was. It's a conversation. It's a training tool. Let's go back and review your checklist. Now it's coachable moments.
And it's processes. That's one of the things when I revamped the company and we put a lot of things in place. We put processes in place. Everything we did was written down. And that's a key, because at the end of the day, that's what McDonald's does. McDonald's can get away with workers that are not very skilled,
Right.
because as long as they can read or even look at pictures and understand how to make a burger or cook the fries, these are people that can be low. They don't have to be coming in the door with a wealth of knowledge. You just have to have a system they can apply. And that's the success of the fast food industry, is they caught on. They followed on what McDonald's did, and they could make that burger the same way every time because they followed the same process every time. And that goes directly to delegation, accuracy, and consistency. You want that Big Mac to be the same Big Mac every time you show up.
Right.
And you want in your home building industry for that 2161 plan to come out the same way for Mrs. Smith as Mr. Johnson. And that's where the checklist will help in a lot of ways, and processes that go with it.
Love that. So Daran, we talked a lot about the Becoming a Building Science Expert course. And again, I'm a high recommend on that one. How about, and you have mentioned some of your other courses. Are there other things that fall into your Masterclass series that you might want to share with the community?
So we do the series of 6 master classes that also has, when you complete the 6 master classes, a master certification. The thing I love about offering that master certification is that if you're a home builder and you want to make sure, and you're building homes to Energy Star, and I have a Success with Energy Star class, by the way, that people can take and understand what do you need to do to be successful with Energy Star, the building science, the program. But if you send somebody through the series of classes, you want to know that they paid attention, got the material, and were successful. And that's where the mass certification comes in. It's a test at the end to make sure that they use the workbooks that come with each class to take the exam and get the certification. So as a manager, when you put a superintendent through my series of classes, or an assistant superintendent or whomever that might be, you know that they've picked that information up. Building science is the foundation. Then we go to unvented attics, getting ducts in conditioned space. We talk about the energy. We talk about the code, the 2021 code. What's in it? A very user-friendly, lots of pictures, lots of examples. I'm not reading the code line by line. Of course, I have to use some of the text when we're doing it, but I'm giving you the highlights of what is in that code so that you can be successful interfacing with the building officials to make sure that they've got that correct. And then I've got in there the energy programs class, which talks about Energy Star, but also the other EPA programs like WaterSense and Indoor Air Plus. I talk about the rating industry. All of these energy programs require a home energy rater, which is what I was when I had my company. They're the foot soldiers that make sure all the testing inspections are done. Every checklist is completed accurately. You get your Energy Star label to give to the homeowner, that the EPA gets notified that you've got that home completed, that the utility knows that it's completed, so you get your rebate money. The rater is the quarterback of your team for energy efficiency. The last 2 classes are products related. I do one on the envelope, energy efficiency products related to the envelope, and systems like HVAC, water heating, lights, appliances, solar, batteries. That brings together a package that when you're done, you've really got an understanding of the whole picture of energy efficient building, so that you can be super successful and confident building a home as part of these energy programs and code. Because even if you didn't do Energy Star, the home's still going to have to be built to code.
Right.
And we make sure that you understand what is necessary to do that.
One last commercial before we conclude at the end, but after going through your becoming a building science again, I just want to give you a quick compliment. The way that you do the classwork, of course, I knew this because I've seen your in person stuff in the past, but the way that you've created the content online, I think, is very intuitive. And the fact that you use not only your presentation style, but the photos and illustrations, I just thought it was very powerful. So thank you. So last question on building science, and this one is now looking to the future. What does the future hold for building science or energy efficiency for our residential construction industry?
So building science hasn't changed because physics doesn't change. Let's look at the energy efficiency and where we're going there. At the end of my energy program knowledge builder class, number 4, I spend a little time looking in the crystal ball, Jeff, and looking at where we're going. If you look at the trajectory of the building codes, which is the major driver of where we're going, and if you look at the trajectory of the energy programs and the incentives at the federal and utility level, you see everything pointing in the direction of going all electric, which is effectively a decarbonization situation. Everything that we can do to get to a place where electricity is how we operate our homes is going to be the place that we want to go. And the place everything is moving us in that direction. So this isn't me trying to say that's where we should go. I'm not saying that, although I certainly understand and believe in it. This is a collective over years. We're getting to this place of an all electric home. You're never going to produce any natural gas on your property. You could probably chop a tree down and burn a fire for a little bit, but you can produce your own electricity on site. We
Right.
will always need electricity, and how we generate it and power the things in our lives is what matters. All electric is effectively a forever situation for us. We'll never get rid of electricity, but some of the burning something on site, burning a fuel of some kind, that's something that will evolve probably away into the future.
Mm.
So a home builder right now that doesn't get that home ready for being all electric is selling that homeowner short. And some builders they're fine building a home, and what happens 30 years from now is not my problem.
Right.
But I think these all electric realities are much closer than 30 years away. They're here now.
Okay.
I browbeat builders a little bit when I say if you build a home without an outlet in your garage for an electric vehicle, you've already built an obsolete home.
Mm.
It's a simple thing like that. A plug in your garage, a 220 plug, 220, 240 plug in your garage, 40 amp circuit that you can charge an electric vehicle. Somebody can plug in, because we are going in that direction. It may be a slower as we look into the future that we evolve into that, but we're not going backwards when it comes to those things. That's the biggest thing, is that you've got to think in terms of all electric, because that's where we are headed.
Gotcha. Okay. Who has been the most impactful leader in your life and career, and how?
I've thought about it often. I never really had a mentor in all the years that I've done what I've done. It could have been, quite frankly, the person that I started the Energy Star program, the professor at ASU. I'll call him out, Howard Bashford. Howard was as close to a mentor for me as I ever had. I did a lot of reading, a lot of biography, looking at leaders at all levels and fields, from politics to business. Those were the examples where I gleaned my leadership knowledge from. So a lot of study. Dan Sullivan, I continue to go back to his material and his book 10x, 10x is better than 2x, one of
Right.
his most recent ones. That's a great synopsis, that book in and of itself, of a lot of his philosophy. It's a new book that just came out a year and a half ago or so, but there's tons of secrets in there, tons of really good information. He's just one of many, but he certainly is well regarded, respected. So
sure.
I didn't get coached by him directly, but I got coached in his program by his coaches, and they opened my eyes to a lot of leadership a lot of leadership skills that I needed to make sure that I followed. I think I can share with you about how I got to where I am today.
I guess just from a personal note, you mentioned a lot of biographies. is there a standout or one that you might be able to recommend for the community, like a biography that was specifically impactful?
When you consider leadership style, there's different kinds of styles. I'm a bit of a political junkie.
Okay.
So for me, when you look back to some of the obvious ones like Abraham Lincoln or Theodore Roosevelt, huge
Mhm.
hero of mine, Theodore Roosevelt's leadership style may not fit in today's world,
Right.
but what an incredible person, incredible pedigree of things he did. Uh, I think Lincoln's probably a better example of to handle things and the way to handle people, the way to lead. Theodore Roosevelt looked back to Lincoln as a great leader. Biography is where you learn about people and how they approach things. So those are a few.
Yeah.
They're not anything odd or out there that's
Yeah, right.
exotic. Boy, you got to read this guy. Never heard of him, but man. So I'm as much as anything like the standards and
Love those
what they do.
recommendations. Yeah. And Lincoln, there's so much there. The humility, the perseverance alone of just what his life meant.
And Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals, is a fairly recent biography. And what I like about that recent biography is that if you ever go to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., and the museum or the bookstore across the street, they've got a stack of books in this 2-story building with a stairwell that goes around this stack of books right down the middle, talking about the thousands of books written about Lincoln. Go to a recent one, Jeff, because the recent biographies tend to have more and latest thinking, and it's based on standing on the shoulders of all those that preceded it. So Team of Rivals is a really good one to get a sense of Lincoln and what he did and how he did it and the humility that you talked about.
Love that. So Darren, last question on leadership. What is the best actionable leadership lesson that you have ever learned in your life or career? Could you share that with the community?
I was just in a meeting with my team today, and one of the things that I wanted to do is make sure that my team felt very comfortable to share what they needed to share with me. So, communication, being a good listener, allowing yourself to listen. And some leaders have challenges with being okay having other people tell them if something needs to change because they look at it as a weakness or a fallacy or something that they've done wrong. When in reality, listening to what other people recommend, what they have to share, makes you stronger. When I started my job right out of college, working in the commercial construction industry, I was working at a very large project, actually the Arizona Science Center in downtown Phoenix. I was working for Shannon Construction at the time, and I was an assistant superintendent on this project. And we were building this project for the city of Phoenix. And it was our job to write and report to the city of Phoenix how we were doing. And I wrote a letter, and the project manager, the gentleman that was considerably older than me, but wise. And so I wrote a letter and I felt really proud. And I said, Sam, here's the letter. And Sam was awesome because he got out his red pen and he tore that thing up. It was bloody by the time I got it back. And I could have been defeated. I took all of his suggestions and I made them and I gave it back to him and he cut it up again. I went through a couple rounds. He went through that. And I will tell you that a lot of people might be resentful. They might be upset. But my attitude was this: I'm going to send this letter. It's going to be written under Daran Wastchak. I'm the one that's going to sign it. And what he did was make me look better.
Right. Love that.
Now that letter is going to go out making me look better because he took the time and effort to educate me. And I never forgot that. But it's allowing yourself to take criticism and suggestions because it makes you better. And it empowers the people around you because they're going to know that they can come to you if they've got a problem or a suggestion, and you're going to openly listen and accept it. You may not agree with it, and you may say, we can't do it this time, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. That part, I think, is the hardest thing for leaders to do sometimes.
Right.
And I work at it all the time, Jeff.
And I would concur. That is a muscle that needs to continually be built. I'm always a big fan of saying that out loud over and over. I worked with people in my career for decades, and I would still say, hey, listen, I need people in my court that call me out when I'm wrong. If there's something that I'm not seeing, you need to have the empowerment to come say the words to me when I'm wrong, or if you see it differently, share, because if you don't make it a discussion, it's buried.
Absolutely. It's the only way to get better.
Daran, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today, and I so appreciate you sharing your depth of wisdom about building science and energy efficiency, which we could have just made the whole podcast about that. The show is also about leadership, and you're such a fantastic example of a leader. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast today. Let's put a plug in specifically for Learning Edge LLC.com, which is where you can go to find all of the coursework that we've been talking about, whether it's Becoming the Building Science or the Masterclass series.
That's correct. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to be here. You've seen a lot of success already, and I've admired from a distance all that you've been putting together, including this podcast. So I'm grateful to be here, share information, and talk a little bit about some of the things that I do and the classes that I teach. I'm always excited to share information with people, and all you've done is given me another opportunity to share information. Thank you.
I love that. So again, thank you to our sponsor today. It just so happens to be Learning Edge, your go-to source for energy efficient building education. And thank you to the Rise Leader community. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, like it, share it, and if you would be so kind, please leave us a review.
That's it for this episode of The Rise Leader. Thanks for joining us today. To connect further, visit riseleadershipaz.com, where you can find show notes, resources, and more episodes. You can also find The Rise Leader on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback helps us reach more leaders and continue to deliver valuable content. Until next time, remember to step up, make a difference, and lead with impact. This is The Rise Leader, signing off.